everybody, and good evening, and a very warm welcome to this evening's Thinking for International Women's Day. My name's Liz Mosley, I'm editor and partner at Tortoise, and if you haven't been to a Thinking before, you're very, very welcome. We are here to have a conversation, an interactive conversation. I want to know what you think, I want to hear your personal experiences, I want to get your data, your insights, your ideas, because we have a big question to try and grapple with this evening. I've done 2 thinkings already today. This is my 3rd of the day. Quite nice feel-good International Women's Day thinking. We've talked enthusiastically about the possibilities for flexible and hybrid working being absorbed into the mainstream. We've talked about the return of mandatory pay gap reporting. We've talked about the relative success of female leaders in kind of shepherding their countries through the crisis. And they were all quite jolly and inspiring. This evening's thinking, I'm afraid, might not be so much of a feel-good one, because I don't feel that good about some of the data that we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to try and answer quite a specific question. I want this conversation to be one that has guts, because we all know, I'm going to take as my start point an acceptance that the impact of the coronavirus pandemic in the UK particularly has not been gender neutral, and that the burden of that impact economically, in terms of stress, in terms of mental health, and whole gamut of impacts has been borne more heavily by women. And I want to try and unpick what we know about the specifics of those impacts, using data that has been produced by organisations right across the women's sector, one of them being Pregnant and Screwed, and we're going to talk to the founder and CEO of Pregnant and Screwed in a second, Jolie Brearley. A whole number of organisations have gathered together a bunch of statistics and data about how women are coping, and published it recently in a report by the Women and Equalities Committee on the unequal impact of the pandemic. And Phoebe in the chat, my colleague, is going to try and marshal your comments. Hi Phoebes, and input in the chat. Please do weigh in with what you've experienced and what you know. And there's a link to the very good report and that she's just put in there to have a look at. So to quote that unequal impact report, the sort of hook for this evening's conversation is this one. The report highlights how existing gendered inequalities in the economy have been ignored and sometimes exacerbated by the pandemic policy response. So that's the part I'm interested in, and sometimes exacerbated by the policy response. Now, all policies are choices. Nobody expects the government to get everything right, and the report goes out of its way to acknowledge this was a pandemic. It's a nightmare. You're moving at speed. You've got to do things quickly. But what I really want to unpick, and when Belrabera Addy joins us at 7 o'clock, we're going to get into the specific policies and their relative gendered impact, and whether we can conclude that some of this is actually discriminatory as opposed to just unfortunate. To start us off, a little statistic I learned just now on Twitter, a report published in Politico, of the 123 national and global task forces established to tackle COVID-19, 17 of those had a equal gender split, and 15 had no women on them at all. So of 123 altogether, only 17 were equal. And what we know is, of course, that women just haven't been in the room. I'm going to come to Jolie, who can help us set the scene. Now, Jolie really is an incredibly brave and tireless campaigner in the space, particularly about pregnancy and maternity discrimination, particularly. And your book came out last week called The Motherhood Penalty and How to Fix It, Jolie. And I've watched your campaign. Has it been about 6 years or so that you've been around campaigning for Pregnant and Screwed? I've watched it very closely because pregnancy and maternity discrimination is something that I have experienced and that is very close to my heart. I wonder if you might start us off, just for those people who might not know of Pregnant Then Screwed and the work that you've been done on, how you ended up making this your life's work. What happened to you to get you started down this path?
So I'd have to take you back to a younger, far less jaded much less saggy version of me in 2013. I was working for a children's charity, and it was on a project that I had designed and had secured all the income for. And it was a year-long project. I discovered I was pregnant, but wasn't planned. Won't go into too much detail about that. I informed them that I was pregnant by email. I was 4 months pregnant at the time. And obviously I realized that it might be a bit of a headache for them, but sort of naively assumed that they'd congratulate me and together we'd figure out how we'd get through me taking maternity leave. And the next day they called me. I was actually brushing my teeth, so I couldn't answer the phone. Listened to the answer phone message, and it simply said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but we are pulling your contract. Please hand everything over immediately." And this was from a female CEO of a children's charity. So I was obviously completely shocked. I mean, I genuinely had not even heard the words pregnancy discrimination or maternity discrimination. I just did not believe that this happened at all. I got a lawyer. The lawyer wrote the children's charity a letter demanding I be compensated. That process cost me £300 and the charity just threw it in the bin. And I said to the legal team, "Okay, what's next?" And they said, "Well, you can take it to court." I said, "How much is that going to cost me?" And they said, "Well, about £9,000. And, who has £9,000 when they're about to have a baby? I certainly didn't. And at the same time, I went for a routine hospital appointment and discovered that I was having a high risk pregnancy. My cervix had almost vanished. And I remember the doctor examining me and the colour rushed out of her face. And she said, "Okay, we're going to have to rush you into surgery immediately." So I went into surgery. They did this delightful process where they tried to bolt my cervix together.
My
And
God.
it was lovely. And when I was in the recovery unit, the doctor said to me, "Look, this may not work. It doesn't work on every patient. It's about 25% of patients it works on. So whatever you do, don't get stressed. It is stress that will trigger early onset labor. And if you go into labor now, the baby will die."
Gosh.
So I obviously, I was stressed. I was very stressed. I'd just lost my job. I didn't know where my next paycheck was going to come from. But I could choose to reduce that stress by not taking my employer to tribunal. And as you only have 3 months less, 1 day to raise a tribunal claim, I couldn't wait until Theo was born. He's very healthy, he survived, he's fine, and then pick the case up at a later date. So I was literally left with this choice between justice and the health of my unborn child. And what was so difficult about that was that my power was completely stripped so rapidly. It was within about 2 days. I suddenly went from, having a job, everything was going great, earning an income, my identity was so firmly attached to my work, to no career, no job, being a vessel for a growing fetus. And I wasn't even doing that very well. I was failing at that. And so it just, that moment radicalized me. And it took 2 years for me to actually then launch Pregnant Then Screwed, but it ate away at me every single day. And then I launched Pregnant Then Screwed initially just as a place for women to tell their stories anonymously of pregnancy and maternity discrimination.
Thank you, Jolie. I'm very pleased that Theo is fine and fighting fit and playing Minecraft in the room next door. I would like to know a bit about that 2-year intervening period, because like you say, you launch it so that women can tell their stories, and your story is unique to you and particular. It's your experience, but it's by no means unusual. And I think because we live in the UK and we have, by international comparison, really excellent maternity sort of provision and great laws that are there to protect us from discrimination, you would think that somebody experiencing what you experienced was a vanishingly rare, unfortunate set of circumstances that doesn't happen very much. But that wasn't what you discovered, was it?
No, after I had Theo, I attended parent groups and started talking to other mums about what had happened to me, and was just absolutely staggered at the number of women that were also had experienced some form of discrimination, often not as extreme as mine. But, the stories that we've heard are just terrifying. We heard from a woman who had to do a shot of vodka every morning to prove that she wasn't pregnant. I've had at least 100 stories from women who told their employer they were pregnant and were told to have an abortion. A woman who was told to get a coat hanger for that baby, and another woman that was told by her colleagues they were going to put abortion tablets in the water cooler to get rid of it so she wasn't a burden.
God.
A woman who this is actually a very good story about discrimination, I think. A woman who had worked for the same employer for 6 years, her employer said to her, we think you deserve a promotion. You need to go for an interview. It's just a formality. The job is in the bag. Before the interview, she told her employer that she was pregnant. Went for the interview, didn't get the job. When she asked her employer why, he said he had discussed things with his wife and they had decided that her priorities would change. And that's sort of quite a common theme, actually, that employers think you're going to become distracted, you're going to have other priorities, you're not going to be as committed to your work, and they don't want to put pressure on you. So rather than asking you what you want, they make these decisions for you. But then there's that extreme where you kind of see that the employer was actually sort of naively trying to be kind in some weird way, but getting it very wrong. And then you go to another extreme of a woman who told her employer that she was pregnant and was bullied and harassed so viciously by her employer and her colleagues that she went into labour prematurely. And when she was in the neonatal clinic with her baby who could have died, her boss called her and made her redundant. So you have these like very different extremes, and the statistics show us, and this is a government report from 2016, that 54,000 women a year are pushed out of their jobs for daring to procreate. That's 1 in 9. And 77% of working mums encounter some form of discrimination in the workplace. And what was worse about that report is that those figures had almost doubled in 10 years. So we all think that the situation is getting much better, but actually it was really deteriorating before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. And we've just seen a massive rollback in.
The one of the things that is very, actually wave the book in the air so people can see what it looks like, because I read, my copy was a PDF, so I can't show it. There it is, perfect. One of the things that makes the book very satisfying to read, although it also makes it sort of furious making as well, is that it's very dense with research, with statistics, and it's kind of jaw-dropping number after jaw-dropping number. And you have the sort of anecdotes in as well as you've just described. So some of my, it seems weird to call them favourite stats because they're obviously terrible, but some of the sort of ones that really kind of sort of punched me on the nose were 1/3 of employers avoiding hiring women of childbearing age, which by the way is 24 to 40. So that's quite a big chunk of your working life. On page 67, there's a sentence that really kind of my eyes were out on stalks, because you don't pull any punches, fellow Yorkshire woman, you sort of tell it like it is. Some large and well-known companies have specific policies that purposely discriminate against women. And then you go on to name Nike, Sony, UBS, and the stories that sort of substantiate that statement. And then this one, the EHRC data shows 1,381 tribunals over pregnancy and maternity discrimination between February 2017 and July 2019. And by the way, 352 between January 17 and January 2020. That's only 3 years at the DWP by itself. So I think this notion that, and this context, we're going to come on and talk about the pandemic, this context is very important, because I think the vulnerability of women in being pregnant or going on maternity leave or trying to come back is, it's not really well understood as something that is experienced by so many people, as you say, tens of thousands every year. And I think it's the scale of it that is so shocking when you read the book.
Yeah, I mean, the scale of it, I think you're absolutely right that people really don't appreciate how big this problem is. And I don't think you see this problem until it happens to you, or even if it doesn't happen to you, you're sort of at that phase where you're having children and your friends are starting to say, oh, this happened to me at work, what do I do about it? And certainly, as I say, it was an absolute complete shock for me. Part of the problem is that it's covered up with non-disclosure agreements.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens a lot, and I know of employers who win awards for gender equality, employers who today, International Women's Day, are all over Twitter and all over social media talking about how brilliant women are and how much they look after women in their workplace. And I know for a fact that behind closed doors, as soon as a woman gets pregnant, they kick her out of her job. And when she's vulnerable and confused, they say to her, we'll give you a small amount of money, but just sign this agreement. And that gags her from speaking to anybody about what has happened. So the stuff that we're aware of is just the tip of the iceberg. There is this whole layer of discrimination that is happening behind the closed doors of companies that we cannot lift the lid on because of these legal weapons.
Yeah. I'm going to bring in a couple of people who are commenting in the chat. Yasmin is a regular at Tortoise. I think probably joining us from Paris. You've just moved to Paris, haven't you, Yasmin?
I have, and I'm not going to put my video on because I'm literally in bed. Sorry.
Absolutely fine. Because your background in engineering, you know, is sort of notoriously boysy, and you're saying that the youth requirement, if you're going to get a woman into STEM, you have to leave when you're 25.
Yeah, I mean, that was essentially the informal kind of statement. So I started working in the field on rigs when I was 20, and you know, everyone was very kind of like happy for you to be working when you were super young. But essentially, as soon as we started, like I had one female colleague a couple of years older than me, and when she asked about her next field assignment, boss was like, well, I know you want to have children soon. She actually never wanted to have children, and she talked publicly about never wanting to have kids. He was like, no, I know you're going to want to have kids soon, and we just don't think the experience is like, why would we waste time giving you the experience? And then similarly, so I was doing quite well and was quite highly ranked in the company and stuff, and the boss was like, yeah, well, I mean, there's no point really giving women field work because they'll want to get pregnant anyway. And this is like the head of department, this is the head of drilling in the country, right? This is so essentially, and despite the fact that and it's not unexpected, but it's infuriating, and there is no recourse because the guys all kind of agree. There's no one really there, and what happens is all the women get squeezed out, and so there's no one working above you who you can look to. The only women that make it like past junior engineer are women who never get married and don't have kids. Like they end up being successful, but that's the price. And you know, yes, I just think one of the most senior women in oil and gas in Australia, where I grew up, incredible. I think she like headed BP for a bit in Australia. On International Women's Day a few years and years ago now, she did a big talk, and somebody in the audience put his hand up and asked her a question about how she managed with children, and she said, "Oh, I chose not to have kids." And he said, he was at my table, and he was like, "Oh, no." Another guy was at my table, and he was like, "Oh, that's a bit disappointing. It takes away from what she did, didn't it? The fact that she chose." And I was like, I suppose the thing that, you know, and this is not surprising to anyone really, but it always made me wonder, like, what's the point of even excelling in this industry if I'm kind of I'm set up to fail from the get-go? Like, you want me for like 3 or 4 years before you think I'm gonna have a kid? Like, all of you are trash anyway. Why would I want to have a baby with any of you? Like, anyway.
Thanks, Yasmin. I hope you're safe in your new home in Paris. We might come to talk about tribunals later on when we get into the conversation about Jodie's case and different women's ability to access justice. But as a sort of segue into looking specifically about COVID-19 and the specific things around COVID-19, one of the things I want to try and tease out in this thinking is to sort of build a bridge between my feeling, if you like, my sense that the women just don't really figure in government decision making, or haven't in government decision making about COVID policy, and where that sometimes that feeling becomes a sort of despair. In the book, Jodie calls it the depth of frustration, desperation, and fury that the government just kind of don't get it somehow, and some of the policy decisions or the rules decisions, they're not even policies particularly, comes across as callous. And the treatment of pregnant women and new mums in the pandemic is a sort of illustration of that, where you just think, it just feels a bit cruel somehow, and borderline dangerous. And Jodie talks about this in the book too. So the fact that it wasn't mandatory to do a risk assessment for pregnant women as it relates to COVID-19 in the workplace. And then when the government made announcements about the original lockdown rules, it really wasn't clear about what you were supposed to do if you were pregnant. And lots of pregnant women thought that they had to shield for 12 weeks no matter what. And it's just things like this, that kind of lack of clarity creates real anxiety when you're already pregnant and you're vulnerable anyway. And that's before we even get into the thing about, well, when you have to go in to have your baby, you've got to do it by yourself.
Yeah. So it took the government 9 months to produce any guidance whatsoever on pregnant women in the workplace. I mean, the irony is you could have had a baby in that time. So on the 16th of March, they said pregnant women are put in the vulnerable category. And they said, we don't have the research to say whether they're going to be disproportionately impacted or not. We're just, want to be cautious. So we're going to put them in the vulnerable category. But didn't say what that meant. What if you were pregnant? Do you go into work the next day? Do you get on the tube? What are your rights? What does that actually mean in reality? And instead, when we kept saying to the government, you need to be very clear about what this means, they kept deferring to the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, who offer clinical guidance. They don't offer legal guidance or employment guidance. They just offer clinical guidance. So we found that, yes, lots of pregnant women were being suspended from work, as they should be, for health and safety reasons, but on completely the wrong terms, often on no pay or on sick pay. And it meant that these women were having to choose between the health of their unborn child and their living, their income. And Black women were disproportionately impacted. They were far more likely to be put in very unsafe conditions, and far more likely to, if they were suspended, to be put on no pay whatsoever. And we know that during March and May, 18 pregnant women died. And 8 of those pregnant women were Black, Asian, or ethnic minorities. That's a really high proportion. And that's not okay. Yeah. And I am livid that it took them 9 months to finally say, okay, pregnant women, here are your rights in work. 9 months. It's just madness. So yeah, there was pregnant women. And then in terms of other policies, of course, Liz, there was the self-employed income support scheme.
Yeah.
Which was announced, and the support scheme took your average earnings over the last 3 years and gave you 80% of that average. What it didn't factor in was that many women had taken periods of maternity leave during those last 3 years. And so that meant that they were receiving a payment that was at least a third of what they should have got. Often it was far more, because of course, if you're self-employed, it takes you a long time to rebuild your business once you go back. And lots of people say, well, self-employed men would have taken time out to care for their children. Well, they don't really, because they don't have any rights. Self-employed dads don't get anything at all. Yeah. So it's nearly always the mum who takes time out to care for those kids. And so what we're finding is that women are punished twice. They're doing the most important job in the world by giving birth and looking after that child during maternity leave, in which point they are given £151 a week, so far less than minimum wage, the third lowest pay in Europe. You can't survive on it. And then they were being punished financially again by the way that this scheme was being calculated. When Rishi Sunak was questioned on it in Parliament by Ellie Reeves, the Labour MP, his response was, everybody has ups and downs in earnings. It could be because of sick leave, ill health, or other. And when we wrote to them, they responded and included a holiday in that. So they were saying that being on maternity leave was the same as taking a holiday.
Howls of anguish from anybody that's ever endured maternity leave. So I'm going to come, Phoebe, get ready with the slides in a second, and I will come into Tessa for sure on the chat talking about childcare costs, because I know that Phoebe's slides are kind of good segue into that too. when we get into the sort of sector-based support or lack thereof for sort of women dominated sectors. But Jolie, you're Pregnant Then Screwed basically raised, did a crowd justice crowdfunding thing to try and take a discrimination case against the Chancellor of the government or whatever, on the basis that the structure of the self-employed income support scheme was discriminatory because you got less money if you had a maternity leave in that 3-year period. And the reason why your profits were lower, which is the sort of the lever on which the amount that you received was calculated, would obviously be lower if you'd spent 6 months or 9 months or a year or whatever looking after a child. And your case was that's discriminatory on the basis of protected characteristic, i.e. you're a woman who've had a baby.
Yeah. And sadly, the judge, Mrs. Justice Whipple, disagreed with our case and felt that because everybody is equally eligible for the scheme, that means that it's not discriminatory. So anybody, no matter what had happened to them, could apply and the rules were the same for everybody. What that judgment fails to recognise is the difference between equality and equity. Just because everybody can equally access that scheme doesn't mean that it is fair for everybody. And this is a pillar really of discrimination. To not acknowledge that is so frustrating, which is why we're looking to appeal the case. Yeah.
I'm very, very disappointed, and if you read the judgment, it's discombobulating. You find yourself going back and reading again because it's very hard to sort of follow the thread of why the conclusion is, and therefore it's not discriminatory. And I know there's a difference between direct discrimination and indirect discrimination and these things, but because you'd gone for something that was really very specific, and women's groups and political parties and things had called on the government to adjust it to make it fairer and so on, it's a frustrating thing to find that there's a conclusion where everybody's looking at the same evidence, but the conclusion is it's fine, and you wonder where you go next with that. But you are going to look to appeal it.
We are looking to appeal it, and at the same time we're calling on the government to just rectify it. Please just fix it. It doesn't stop them fixing the problem just because a judge has ruled that it's not discrimination. That doesn't mean it's fair just because they have decided it's not discrimination. It's still ethically and morally not on that these vulnerable new mothers, many of whom will be single mums, and this will be their only income, are not getting the money that they absolutely deserve. And the gender pay gap amongst the self-employed is 46%. Many women really, really struggle and get paid pittance if they're self-employed. There are a lot of people living in poverty who are classed as self-employed. So these really are vulnerable new mums, and this plunges more children into poverty.
Yeah,
I mean, the insanity of it all makes no sense to me.
Thank you, Jolie. I'm going to go now to Phoebe, who's going to take us through the slides. I can see that Yelena's got her hand up. I want to come to Tess, and I know that Belle has just arrived as well. So we've got a ton to get through. So Phoebe, you take it away and show us some data to help us contextualize this.
Yeah, so this is kind of running from that main report from the Women and Equality Commission, and then kind of pulling in some of the research they used on our own research, and also then from Jodie's organisation, Pregnant Then Screwed. So this is kind of just like to set it off at the start. So this is women in work. So we're talking about women and men in employment, and you can kind of see that what we like to see is those 2 points moving closer together. So that's men in the dark green and women in the light green. And then if you look really, really carefully right towards the end of 2020, as we come into 2021, men slightly peak up a bit and women slightly go down a bit. So actually we're at the record was 72.4% for employment of women, and it's now dropped to 71.8%. And this may not seem like much, but when you're talking about the context of women across the country, that is a large number of people. So, you know, that's down 117,000 year on year. That's 117,000 women. That, you know, that this makes a difference. And also, as we're talking about it, the most common sectors for women's employment in the UK are health and social work, for about 20% of all jobs held by women in September, then wholesale and retail, and education. As you think about it, you know, these are the people that these are very incredibly valuable people at the time of the pandemic. These are the people we rely on. These are the people we've been clapping for, and this is, you know, employment is going down. So that's kind of like painting the scene as we're coming into the pandemic. And then on the next slide, so furlough, which, you know, to a lot of people, and in my mind, it's, you know, it's been an incredibly valuable scheme in a lot of ways, but as kind of Jolie was showing, it's more complicated than just giving someone money. You know, women make up the majority of part-time employment compared to men. Women are more likely to be on temporary contracts, more likely to be on 0 hours contracts. This meant that women who are on those insecure contracts are, one, more likely to be furloughed, and two, more likely to less likely, to receive a discretionary top up to their furloughed earnings. So that means, you know, they're not getting the money that they need at the same time as providing that childcare. So and also the Institute for Fiscal Studies found that mothers are 47% more likely to have than fathers to have permanently lost their jobs or quit, and are 14% more likely to have been furloughed. So, you know, it as you kind of look on all those peaks and those troughs, women are again and again at the top of those peaks. So you can't deny that women are in a worse position than men in terms of the furlough scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And the next slide. So this is some of the research from Pregnant and Screwed. I really recommend just like going through the site and also going through the data that they submitted to the report. It's fantastic, Jolie. I was digging into it. So kind of the key ones I picked out were from this survey that you guys did in July, looking to 20,000 pregnant women on the impact of childcare closure. So clearly very important as we come back into schools today, but 65% of those who've been furloughed said lack of childcare was the reason. 50% of mothers have either been made redundant or think they will be in the next 6 months. 46% of those who were made redundant said lack of childcare played a role in their redundancy. You know, childcare and jobs do not run separately, they are intermingled. It is all about investing in those spaces. And if we go into the next slide. So this is something that me and Liz spoke about, and something that I'm sure you'll all remember. So government messaging has been at the heart of the pandemic. There's lots of key things you can see at the bottom: the stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. This was in January. So this was the messaging that was being put out about staying at home. And I'm sure you remember, if you can see women doing housework, women looking after the children, you know, the man sitting down on the sofa while the woman does the work at home. And just so you're aware as well, the Advertising Standards Authority stipulates that you must not include gender stereotypes that are likely to cause harm or serious or widespread offence. Caroline Noakes, chair of the Women's Equalities Committee, criticised this and said, you know, someone had signed this off. You know, and I'm sure we're aware that, you know, we're not preaching to the choir a bit, but there's women in this room who would be like, should we have a rethink of that imagery before it went out? But that clearly didn't happen. And these still have an impact on how people's perceptions of women in work, both for women and for men. And then the final slide. So this is kind of looking maybe a little bit more positively, something that I found really interesting, and we spoke about actually on Friday's conversation we had in our Sense Maker on how we pay the bill for COVID, is research done by the Women's Budget Group looking at investment in the care sector versus investment in the construction sector. And what I found fascinating is, one, men would have more jobs within this. It's not putting men worse off. In fact, it benefits men more so. Women would see an increased role in that space, so that increases work, increases childcare. It massively benefits them. And this is not just within care sector, this is the associated industries, the food sector, construction sector. Still, you need to build buildings, you need to build schools, you need to build homes, and this is for child and for elderly as well. And the total jobs generated is as you can see, like beyond double. So this is, you know, this is incredibly important to society to benefit that you invest in the care sector. And it's not just about those shovel-ready plans we saw in the budget. And, you know, one of the key points in the report was that in the summer economic statement last year, in the winter economic plan, and also in the spring statement, this wasn't raised. And, you know, you look at this and you think, why not? So that's kind of a way forward and something that's a bit more positive in terms of investment.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. I'm going to come now for some sort of reactions to those things to Belle Ribeiro Addy, who I think is here, I hope is here. Are you there, Belle? Can we see and hear you? Belle Ribeiro Addy, are you there? Yes.
Sorry, I was talking
Okay.
which is what everybody does in this.
So lovely to see you, Belle. Thank you so much for finding time at the end of your hectic International Women's Day to come and talk to us about the government's COVID-19 pandemic response and the question of whether it discriminated against women. I wondered if you obviously sit on the Women and Equalities Committee, and you were part of the report that we've been referring to a lot this evening. And one of the major recommendations, a sort of recurring theme in the recommendations in that report, was we urge the government to conduct an equality impact assessment on a number of things, not the industrial strategy, the New Deal, a whole range of sort of facets of decisions that have been made or are in the process of being made. I guess my question is, if we're sitting and we know we can see lots and lots of parts of the jigsaw of the government's COVID response, because there's been so much of it, and it's been such a huge drama and obviously complicated and done at pace and all of those things we understand. We can see multiple examples of really significant aspects that would seem to have either forgotten about women or landed much worse for women in the structure of the furlough scheme, in the missing out legacy benefit claimants qualifying for the 20% universal credit top up, lots and lots of things that seem to have missed women out. Did the government just not do equality impact assessments on these decisions? Are they meant to and they haven't? Or is it just a sort of, it's a good idea to if you've got the time kind of thing? When is it required to do an impact assessment, I guess is the question.
Well, I think this is a major part of the problem. We have fought so hard to have an Equalities Act. We fought so hard for those measures to be very specific about what should be done when new legislation is being put down. We fought so hard to have all of these mechanisms which aim to consider, you know, all of the different facets that those from underrepresented groups might face should something happen. However, in the light of any sign of trouble, equalities are dropped. And that's actually against the law. The Equalities Act is not, there's nothing that stipulates that it's an add-on. There's nothing that stipulates that it's an extra. There's nothing that says it should only be put in place or acted on when it's convenient. It is the law. But this government and successive governments actually have just flouted it completely. Now, equalities impact assessments are meant to be done on every single piece of legislation that's put forward and provided for all policies that are put forward too. However, what we're seeing happening definitely over the last few years in particular is a situation where sometimes the equality impact assessment is just not done. It's just not done, or it's done and it's not published, because there's been some tweak in the law, which probably no one noticed happened at some point, that when you produce an equality impact assessment for legislation that impacts England, you don't have to publish it. The government can just tell you that they've done it. If they publish it, it's a gift. Whereas in Scotland and Wales, they are required to attach it to the legislation, and it's, you know, for the whole entire public to see. So that's been a major issue, that the government can say to us at some points, we've done the equality impact assessment and that's that. And I actually heard the Equalities Minister at some point say, we've done the equality, this is in response to a general question about equality impact assessments. We can't release the details of equality impact assessments sometimes for security reasons or something along those lines, that meant because they're particularly sensitive. And I'm like, what is sensitive about whether or not it will disproportionately impact a community? It's an absolute disgrace. And I think that's where we're having our major issue, that it's not being, the equalities legislation is not being applied correctly. And I remember, oh gosh, and I'm thinking to myself, this is 11 years ago now. I remember when in 2010, the government changed, the parties changed rather, and austerity measures were put in place initially. And I remember it was the Fawcett Society that took the government to court. And I remember they were actually quite successful, except the judge said at the time it was too late. They had brought their case too late, but not just that, it was inconceivable that the courts could stop the government from doing something. Now, in particular, over the past year, mostly actually with immigration cases, we've seen the government taken to court quite a few times and instructed quite a few times. So I'm wondering if now, 11 years on, if, you know, the government were held to task in the same way that they were 10 years ago, we'd have a completely different story. And that's something I hope, you know, there are many excellent people on this call. I hope that somebody would be willing to take up.
Fascinating. So the equalities impact assessments are required. It's baked into the Equality Act. Is it part of that legislation? But just one way or another, the law's been changed and it doesn't seem to be happening. And even if you do it, you don't have to then reveal the findings. It's fascinating and very unedifying, but thank you, Belle. I wonder if I might just ask you another one before we move on. We talked a little bit, and I think you must have. I think you would have been on the call when we were looking at the terrible image, the awful picture of stay at home, and then lots of pictures of sort of little cartoon women doing the ironing and being honest. And it's a sort of expression of a feeling that women just don't really figure in the thinking of the government announcements. Is it your sense? I want to try and be as fair as I possibly can, and as fact-based as I possibly can. Is it your sense that there is a sort of an underlying, maybe it's unspoken, maybe it's even unconscious feeling that actually there are members of in positions of power in this country who quite like the idea of women being kept at home, actually?
I'm not sure if I'd say they quite like the idea of women being kept at home. However, it does seem that in this particular period of time, people have just reverted to some really, really damaging stereotypes, I think, and some damaging standards. So I suppose less we want to keep you at home and more actually equality doesn't really matter. And we see that in the way in which the support packages were applied, knowing full well that they would impact women in the way that they did. And you know, all of the fantastic research that's been put together by Pregnant and Screwed, looking at all of that, and actually knowing that when it came to you know, keeping children at home and taking on extra domestic, because you know, everyone's at home, there's more to be done at home, that women would have to bear all of this, knowing all of that and doing nothing. It's not even oversight, it's just complete dismissiveness. And just thinking of work as well, going to a situation, well, actually, things are very stressful at the moment, so no need to report on whether or not you're paying women enough money. Let's just scrap that, because it doesn't matter if you know, times are short. And that's what I mean by saying people keep considering equalities as an add-on, and it's actually meant to be the law, and that is very damaging. And obviously it's very worrying now that people are going a little bit beyond that and talking about potentially amending our equalities legislation, and I worry about what that will look like and whether it will be a further rollback.
Yeah, thank you, Belle. I'm going to bring in some comments now from people who've been going for it in the chat and what have you. Let's go to Elena first, because she's been dutifully sitting there with her yellow hand up and actually told me, not even today, but last week, that she wanted to talk in this thinking. So she really did get in ahead of the game. Hi, Elena.
Hello, Liz. This discussion has been fantastic. I'd like to preface this with, and I think for me, the thing I've been really mulling about since Friday when I first raised this issue in SenseMaker is about gender inequalities between women. So when we look at the Women and Equalities Commission report, Caroline Noakes talked about how these policies are the impact of repeatedly failing to consider how these inequalities are really embedded into our society and our economy. And I think ultimately these issues are exacerbated when you don't take an intersectional approach. So women, like we've said, are overrepresented in low-paid, insecure jobs in sectors that locked down early, like hospitality. And when you add, you know, racial considerations, ethnic, socioeconomic factors, and how that plays into it, it's just layer after layer of effect, basically, in these policies. And I was really, you know, disappointed, but not surprised, to see today about how, you know, over 2/3 of the NHS workers who are going to be affected by this 1% pay rise or pay offer are women. Again, it's just the product of not, I struggle to see, though, whether that's necessarily institutional versus intentional thoughtlessness, which is the point I raised and how Caroline summarized it in the report, whether it is really like this lack of imagination and competence, when you take into account exactly what Bella's saying about how these rights are considered and equality is considered as something that's nice to have and not a necessity. We saw that at exactly the same time as this report came out with the Braverman bill, and Stella Creasy came out and said that, you know, paid maternity leave is now basically a management luxury, like a company car, because it applies to some women in Parliament, in politics, in UK society, and not to others. And the final point I just want to make, Liz, is on the Politico article that you raised earlier. I think that was a fantastic read. And as heartbreaking as it was to read that UN Women think it's going to take 130 years for us to achieve gender parity and representation, I think the more shocking and the more pervasive thing that we need to draw from that report is the fact that women, where they are being represented, are in more of the socio-cultural portfolios rather than the hard portfolios. And it goes straight back to what Belle was saying about the equalities impact assessments there, that we're not seeing gender being integrated as an issue. It's not, there's no gender mainstreaming. It's still a separate issue that's part of a separate committee, the Women and Equalities Committee. It's not part of our general politics. It's politics as other.
Thanks so much, Yelena. I'm going to try, if I can, we're already at 7:20. I don't quite know where that happened. I'm going to try, if I can, to bring in Jenny Flynn. I'd love to hear from Tessa and Luke, who is bravely contributing in the chat as well. So let's go to Jenny Flynn first, if we can. Jenny, you're talking about, and this is a big theme actually in Jolie's book, talking about the value of care work when we are busy looking after whoever they may be, children, elderly parents, whoever they may be, and not being paid for it, how that can be rectified and how that sort of shapes, you know, what are we called, economically inactive, I think we are, aren't we?
I don't necessarily think I have a solution, but it's just kind of an observation, I suppose, that it's really easy to devalue something if you're not willing to put a value on it. So it's really easy to basically forget women or men, whoever it is who's kind of doing those kind of care duties, domestic duties at home, if you're not willing to put a financial value on it, because at the moment financial values are the only kind of value that we seem to place on anything. You know, there's all these calls to create natural capital, social capital, but it's not actually happening, and there's no accounting system at the moment which puts any sort of number on that, and so it's therefore really easy to overlook those people because they're essentially invisible. And yet the entire economy, I don't imagine, would function at all without all of those unpaid services. So it seems, I don't know, it just seems like there's a silent workforce kind of propping everybody up, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly how it feels to the people who are doing it. And I think I mentioned when Belle first arrived that the fact that the £20 a week uplift in universal credit, I mean, universal credit is very problematic for women anyway, for lots and lots of reasons, the way it's structured, the way it's paid, but the universal credit doesn't apply for claimants who are claiming what they call legacy benefits, the ones that haven't been rolled in yet. The majority of whom are women, both in terms of disabled benefit and carers allowance, I think it's called. Just seems a bit bizarre. Can we go to Luke, because you were in a back and forth, I think, with Jenny Flynn about this thing to do with paying women for what at the moment is unpaid, or women or men for work that doesn't get paid for, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What I was saying was, I guess it was kind of linked to the idea of how it's valued, but simply, I guess it was saying that there are some problems with paying people for that work in cash terms, benefits for those people, and that it massively changes the incentives to work, and a whole bunch of other problems with it, with gameability. And we've got quite a lot of evidence in this country of how cash benefits are not always that helpful and constructive, not to take away from the enormous amount that they do, but I think the problem has been that we've used cash benefits as a crutch in a system that has consistently hollowed out care service provision, and where competence and expertise and commitment really has been drained out of our public services, and cash benefits have needed to stand in for decade after decade, and that's the problem with a government the kind that we've sort of been talking about here, that lacks some of the critical empathy in decision making that maybe was needed. So that's all I was saying. I'm not entirely convinced on that point. And then the previous thing I was saying was that rates of the number of children in the care of local authorities has been growing in this country for a long time, and it's arguably a real problem that again I think is going unaddressed, that there are reasons, perhaps good reasons, for there being barriers to entry in having in procreating, as it was put earlier. And I again, I'm not entirely convinced on this point, but it feels to me like some of those barriers to entry need to remain, so that the responsibility of being a parent also remains intact, was the point I was making of it.
Thanks, Luke. There's a really good question actually that Yelena's asked to Belle about whether a sort of Women and Equalities Commission is still the right and constructive model, or does having a Women and Equalities Commission that sort of sits over there and can challenge and sort of call out, it sort of annexes the idea of equality into a thing that is separate rather than being sort of fully integrated into everything. What's your sense? I mean, it feels like it's necessary given the state we're in, but I see what Yelena's getting at.
I think it's about the willingness of the structure, if that makes sense. So if there was a government, or if it was understood within our democracy that this was central to it, having a separate Women and Equalities Commission that essentially oversaw equalities and checked on everything in every single department would make sense. However, if there continues to be an unwillingness to do that, I can definitely see Yelena's point about it being something else. But I mean, this is just about our culture, I think. And if we could change that culture, as it was, the the Equality and Human Rights Commission, as it was, would be more useful. But a Women and Equalities Commission would be more useful. But it's fundamentally the culture.
When does the government have to respond to the report that the committee published on the gendered unequal impact specifically? They have to respond to everything, don't they, eventually? Yeah,
they do. I need to double check on that timeline, but they do have to respond.
In the end,
they do have to respond. They come to the committee and we can ask them questions. Unfortunately, it can be very, very frustrating because you feel like you get a lot of yes, that's very important answers, but we did this and we did this and we did this, and then you don't really get to a final point where there is a commitment to make a change. Just a lot of little tweaks here and there as to what has been done and why it looks good, when we really, really need an overhaul of the system and a complete culture change within Parliament.
Yeah. Thanks, Belle. I'm going to come to Tessa. I've been promising her for ages that I was going to come to her, and then I'm going to go to Jolie to sort of round things out. Tessa, are you there?
I am. Honestly, Liz, I don't know where to start. Where do we start? Sorry. I feel like I've been trapped in a maternal Groundhog Day for 20 years. Well, we start, don't we, by making this less of a women's issue and more of a societal issue. We've seen Sure Start, which was probably one of the most effective government design programs that covered both the sort of working ambitions for women with childcare, with coaching, with development. We've seen that taken out at the knees. And it just, the reason I'm actually really struggling on this call tonight is because I feel a sort of combination of anger and serious frustration, because I feel so sort of impotent at the moment, because there doesn't seem to be anybody sitting in government that I recognise as someone who gets this, who's leading on it, who's pushing for it, who believes in it. And, I can go back over my sort of lifetime as a mother and look at people like Harriet Harman, look at Tessa Jowell, look at these women who actually I felt were there speaking to me. And I just don't, it's a bloody vacuum. And that's why I'm feeling actually quite almost upset tonight. We know the stats, we know this recession is going to hit women harder. We know that the short-termism of that requires women to make decisions for their family in the short term, for the best interests of their family. We understand that, but that means way too many of them take redundancy, which means they're out of the workforce, which means it's tougher to get back, which means we're looking at financial insecurity in the long term for women. We're losing a loss to the revenue in terms of tax receipts, all the things we know. But the hurdle for women to get over is so flipping high, stopped myself, and who's bothered about lowering it?
Tessa, you're right. I don't want to leave everybody feeling really bleak, because it's International Women's Day and we're supposed to be.
So what do? We vote. We vote in the mayor. We vote. We use our vote. We use WEP in the mayoral elections. We sign up. We do it.
Orange ballot paper. It's the bottom box. Get a woman from the Women's Equality Party on the London Mayoral Assembly. Jolie, I'm going to come back to you because your book is fantastic. I really, really feel that it won't make you feel full of joy if you read Jolie's book, but it will arm you with some real fire and some brilliant statistics that will help you and to support your friends if they're going through it, and really, really practical. You have a sort of designed a bit of a sort of treatment, if you like, at the end to say, okay, these are the things. It's very practical guidance and advice. And I think the sort of package of 4 things that you sort of talk about to make this thing better is flexible working, childcare, access to justice, and quotas. And I think that there's so much that needs to change, Jolie. I wish you all the best with your appeal of your case. But if you were going to sort of take a parting shot, some closing remarks to the people who've listened tonight, I might be feeling discombobulated, despairing or something, what would you say? Because you came from that really awful experience that was terrifying, and you've turned it into something which is very potent and very powerful and is legitimately informing. You know, your work from Pregnant Then Screwed was quoted all the way through the committee's report that the government are now compelled to respond to. You know, that's what impact looks like. What would you say to people like Tess, who's sitting there thinking, oh my goodness gracious me?
I would like to add to that list paternity leave. I think that
did I miss that one off?
Properly ring-fenced, properly paid paternity leave. Had we had that before the pandemic, we would not have seen such a massive difference in the unpaid labour being done by women and men. We know that closes the unpaid labour gap if men take time out in those early days to care for their kids. What I am encouraged by is firstly the fact women are angry, they're livid. Mothers in particular that I have been speaking to are furious. We are getting messages every day saying, how can we help you? How can we get involved? What can we do? Let's get out in the streets and march. I mentioned the strike that happened in Iceland in 1970 in a Guardian article, and I must have had 200 messages from women saying, when are we going on strike?
Yeah.
People are furious, and things only change when you cross. I am also slightly encouraged by the fact that because of lockdown, men have had to be at home and they have seen lots of the dirty work that women do. They've been exposed to the unpaid labour. The dads, and this is not just me saying this, there is research to support this. The dads, when they do that unpaid labour, they do the fluffy unpaid labour. They do the bath times, they do the play times, they do the fun bits. They don't do the scraping of the uncrusted porridge or the fishing hair out of sinks, you know, all the really and the telling off of the children, you know, the hard discipline, it tends to fall to mothers. And so many of them will have had to have done all of that unpaid labor because perhaps their partners were key workers and so they were outside of the home, but at least they will have been more exposed to it. And as with the Iceland strike, men were suddenly exposed to this unpaid labor and it changed the way Iceland worked. And so it's, you know, looking on the bright side, but I do hope that ultimately that starts to tackle some of these deeply entrenched gender stereotypes that are so pernicious. But really what we need is a change of legislation. Until the legislation changes, it's going to take a long time to change things. So we need to be writing to our MPs and campaigning for change.
Thank you, Jolie. What we try and do in these thinkings, those of you that will come to watch them will know, is we're looking for news lines, we're looking for things that we can report out as a journalistic organisation. And some of the things that Belle particularly was saying to our question, which was, has the UK government's COVID-19 response discriminated against women? maybe that's the wrong framing of the question. Maybe what we need to look at is the application of these equality impact assessments. Where are they published? Where are they not published? When do they really happen? When do they not happen? That is something we can get our teeth into as a bunch of journalists, really looking to try and point and draw correlations between, well, isn't it interesting that it happened here, but it didn't happen there? And as Mandu Reid said when she came on the Tortoise COVID inquiry, she said, you know, there's an old adage which is follow the money. She said, when it comes to gender inequality, follow the power. And I think that is one of those things that if we look at those correlations and the order of magnitude of effort and energy and money that has gone into things that benefit men versus benefit women, I think that's where we'll find the story. Thank you very, very much to everybody for your time. Of course, thank you so much to Belle, after I know she's had a long day, to carve out half an hour to come and talk to us, and for your work on the committee, to Jolie for the amazing book and for all the work that you're doing and continue to do at Pregnant Men Screwed. We thank you both from the bottom of our feminist hearts. Keep fighting the good fight, and thank you very much to everybody for joining in this evening. It's been a privilege to host it. Happy International Women's Day, and tomorrow I will still be a feminist too, so I'll see you then. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.